Ever feel like you're stuck in an echo chamber?
Mm-hmm.
Just hearing the same perspectives over and over again.
Yeah.
That's what we're tackling in this deep dive.
Okay.
We're cracking open Liberal Losers, When the Right Win, We All Lose,
Okay.
by Seenarine.
Oh, I've heard of this one.
It's a deep dive into conservative policies.
Okay.
And we're focusing on chapters 14 and 15,
All right.
which are all about race relations, diversity, hate speech.
Yeah, those are some pretty charged topics.
They really are. And you know what I find interesting about Seenarine?
What's that?
His background.
What about it?
His parents.
Yeah.
4th grade education. Family history of indentured servitude.
Really?
Gives him a very different perspective.
It definitely does. That's not something you see every day.
No, not at all.
It makes you wonder how that experience shaped his views on, well, everything.
Exactly. Who better to analyze these issues than someone who's seen their impact firsthand?
That's a good point.
And let me tell you, he does not hold back.
Oh, is he pretty critical?
Let's just jump right into chapter 14, where he breaks down the conservative approach to race relations.
Okay, sounds good.
One of the big things that kept coming up for me was this idea of individual responsibility.
Yeah, that's a big one for conservatives. Personal accountability.
Yeah, it's like that whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea.
Exactly. Seenarine even quotes someone saying, personal responsibility and hard work are the keys to success, not government intervention.
Right. But, and maybe this is just me, but what about when those bootstraps are, metaphorically speaking, frayed?
Or even missing altogether?
Yes. Because of all those systemic inequalities.
It's that classic debate. Individual agency versus societal structures.
It is. And that leads right into the next big thing. Equal opportunity versus equal outcome.
Right. Conservatives tend to be wary of policies that aim to engineer specific outcomes.
Like affirmative action.
Exactly. They'd rather focus on creating a level playing field from the start.
Which kind of ties into that whole colorblind approach, doesn't it? Like, if we just pretend race doesn't exist.
Which on the surface might sound like a good idea.
Right.
But it ignores the very real ways that race continues to shape experiences.
It's like trying to solve a problem without, acknowledging it even exists.
Exactly. Like that's saying you can't fix what you don't acknowledge.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay. How so?
Because Seenarine doesn't just talk about this stuff theoretically. He gets into the weeds.
Okay. Like what?
Like specific policies.
Yeah.
Things that are happening right now.
Got it. So he's connecting it to the real world.
Exactly. Like, for example, the push to end affirmative action.
Yeah, that's been a hot-button issue for decades.
And it's back in the news big time.
With that recent Supreme Court case.
Yes. The Students for Fair Admissions case.
Against Harvard.
Oh, right. Big one.
Huge.
Yeah, and such a landmark case, right?
Just completely changed the game.
What did it rule again? Sorry, my mind's a little fuzzy.
Basically, they said considering race as a factor in college admissions,
Yeah.
even as one of many factors,
Right.
unconstitutional.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it ignited this huge debate.
I bet about fairness, right?
Huge debate about fairness. And whether or not affirmative action actually harms the very people it's supposed to help.
It's that whole idea of unintended consequences.
Right.
Which, speaking of,
Yeah.
voter ID laws.
Oh, right. He talks about those too, right?
Big time. He uses Texas and North Carolina as examples.
Didn't those laws get challenged in court?
He even brings up that Shelby County v. Holder case.
From 2013.
Mm-hmm. The one that basically said the feds don't have as much power to, oversee state voting laws.
And that led to a whole bunch of states implementing stricter voter ID requirements, didn't it?
Exactly. And that brings us back to that conservative principle of preventing voter fraud. But then critics were like, hold up, these laws disproportionately impact minority voters.
Which puts us right back in that loop of competing priorities, right?
Yeah. How do you ensure election integrity while still making sure everyone has equal access?
Right. It's never simple.
And maybe that's what's so fascinating about this book. It constantly makes you think about those trade-offs, those gray areas.
For sure. It's not just black and white, right?
Speaking of gray areas, he also talks about opportunity zones.
Oh, yeah. Didn't he have some thoughts on those?
He does. And this is another one of those things where, on the surface, it sounds great.
Right. Using tax breaks to encourage investment in struggling communities.
Exactly. But then he goes on to explain, what if it just leads to gentrification?
Oh, interesting. So it ends up benefiting wealthy investors.
And displacing the people who actually live there.
So then it's not really helping the people it's supposed to help.
Exactly. It raises all these questions about who benefits in the end.
Which seems to be a recurring theme here, right?
Yeah. And you know what else I thought was interesting?
What?
The fact that he talks about Elon Musk's Twitter takeover.
Oh, wow.
It's like he saw it coming.
Really?
Even back when he was writing the book, he talks about Musk's whole free speech absolutism thing.
Right, and how that might play out on a platform like Twitter.
And, spoiler alert, it's been interesting to watch unfold.
To say the least.
Especially those early days when he started loosening all the content moderation policies.
Didn't he also reinstate a bunch of accounts that had been banned for, like, hate speech and harassment?
He did, and he talks about how groups like, what was it, the CCDH?
The Center for Countering Digital Hate?
Yes. And the ADL reported this huge spike in hate speech after Musk took over.
It's like, where do you draw the line, right?
It's exactly. Free speech versus preventing harm.
It's that constant tension.
And it's not just theoretical. This stuff has real-world consequences.
That's what's so scary about it. It spills over from the digital world into our everyday lives.
It does, and he really drives that point home by talking about the rise in hate crimes.
He cites FBI data, right, showing how much they've increased.
Yeah, and then he goes on to list all those horrific mass shootings.
The ones motivated by hate.
Yeah. Charleston, Pittsburgh,
El Paso, Atlanta,
Buffalo, Jacksonville.
It's a long list, and it's terrifying.
It really makes you wonder, like, where do we go from here? How do we even begin to address this?
Right. How do we balance free speech with the need to protect people from harm?
It feels like an impossible question.
It does, doesn't it?
It feels impossible, right?
Yeah.
Like, where do you even start?
Well, I think for seenarine, it all starts with empathy.
Empathy.
Yeah, being willing to have those tough conversations about race and identity.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Especially when it's uncomfortable. That's where the real growth happens.
Stepping outside those echo chambers.
Exactly. It's about listening to understand, not just to respond.
Even when you totally disagree.
Even then.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing.
What?
We're all in this together, right?
Okay.
The choices we make, the words we use, they have a ripple effect.
And that kind of goes back to that whole personal responsibility thing, doesn't it?
It does. But it's not just individual, it's collective. We have a responsibility to create a society where everyone feels safe and respected.
And that starts with how we talk to each other.
It's a huge part of it. Words have power.
To incite violence, but also
to inspire change.
It's almost like, if I'm hearing you right, the biggest takeaway from all of this is that we all have a role to play.
Absolutely. We all have a part in shaping a better future.
So to everyone listening, as you're out there living your lives, encountering these issues,
think about the role you want to play.
What kind of world do you want to help create?